Okay, picture this. It's July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong has just managed to pry open the door of the Apollo 11 lunar module, but the exit was incredibly tight, and his spacesuit was seriously bulky. So, as he's squeezing out, he accidentally smashes right into this small, fragile component on the wall. It seemed like a tiny bump at the time, but it had near-fatal consequences for the astronauts in this explainer.
He had unknowingly just broken off the ascent engine arming switch. Now, this wasn't just any random piece of the ship. This was literally the absolute only switch that could ignite their engine and launch them off the moon's surface when it was time to go home. Without it, they were totally trapped.
And here is the truly terrifying part. Zero. Because there is absolutely zero air on the moon, there is zero sound. So when that switch snapped off, the sound simply didn't travel anywhere. In the absolute vacuum of space, those two astronauts were completely, blissfully unaware that they had just stranded themselves 400,000 kilometers from Earth.
So how did they even end up in this wildly rushed, deadly situation in the first place? Well, we have to rewind a bit. The Cold War space race had America in a total panic. The Soviet Union had taken this massive early lead, right? They launched the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and then put Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961. The U.S. desperately needed a win.
Enter President John F. Kennedy. Just weeks after the Soviets reached space, Kennedy delivered his famous quote, basically promising the absolute impossible. He declared America would put a man on the moon before the decade was out. I mean, really think about that time frame for a second. They made this massive promise despite having computers the size of literal buildings, no internet, and absolutely zero GPS technology to guide them. To make up for that huge lack of technology, they essentially just threw sheer cash at the problem. We're talking between $7 and $9 billion in extra rapid-fire funding. This kind of money fueled a breakneck, highly dangerous sequence of tests. New missions were launching every few months. And tragically, this rushed pace resulted in the Apollo 1 cabin fire that claimed the lives of 3 astronauts. But they just kept pushing.
Fast forward to July 1969. They actually reached lunar orbit. Now here, the spacecraft has to split into 2 pieces. Michael Collins stayed up top, orbiting the moon in the command module, which they nicknamed Columbia. Meanwhile, Armstrong and Aldrin detached the lunar module, known as the Eagle, to begin their incredibly perilous descent down to the surface. Collins' only job was to wait, because without him, there was zero ride back to Earth.
As the Eagle starts its descent, the tension just completely skyrockets. Suddenly, out of nowhere, at 8:10 p.m., a panicked radio call hits Mission Control, warning of a 12:01 alarm. The crazy thing? At that exact moment, neither Armstrong nor Aldrin even knew what that meant. Turns out, their primitive guidance computer was completely overloading with data right at the exact moment they were trying to land.
But honestly, a computer alarm was the least of their worries. As they get closer to the ground, Armstrong suddenly realizes the automatic landing program is steering them straight into a giant crater filled with massive ship-destroying boulders. So, at just 150 meters up, he's forced to completely override the system. He takes manual control, frantically flying this heavy module like a helicopter, desperately scanning for a safe patch of dust. Inside that cockpit, you can imagine the sheer panic setting in. Buzz Aldrin checks the gauge and sees they have exactly 5% fuel remaining. Just 5%. They are literally hovering over an alien world, frantically searching for a landing spot before the engine runs totally dry and just drops them right out of the sky. Back in Houston, Mission Control is sweating bullets. They start counting down the final 60 seconds, and then the final 30 seconds before they have to instantly abort the whole mission. With less than half a minute of fuel left on that ticking clock, Armstrong finally, thankfully, radios in his success. Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. Phew, right? They made it. But wait, remember that broken switch from the very beginning of our story? Yeah, after spending 21 hours on the moon, walking around, collecting rocks, doing all the historic stuff, they climb back into the module to get ready for liftoff. And it is only then, right at the last possible second, that they finally look down and notice the ignition switch lying snapped in half on the floor. Seriously, how do you escape the moon when your absolute only ride is broken?
They immediately radio their panic back to Earth. But the ultimate fix actually came from inside the cabin. See, a switch just completes an electrical circuit, right? So Buzz Aldrin, in a stroke of absolute genius, takes his plastic ballpoint pen and just jams it straight into the exposed mechanism. And it worked.
The pen completed the circuit and successfully reignited the engine. A literal piece of everyday office supplies saved the entire Apollo 11 mission. You just can't make this stuff up.
But even the trip back home was a total nightmare. Just before re-entering Earth's atmosphere, they had to separate their command module from the much larger service module. The service module's thrusters were supposed to fire and push it safely out of the way, but they failed. The astronauts just had to sit there and helplessly watch out their window as massive chunks of metal debris flew dangerously close, threatening to smash right into their fragile capsule.
This entire mission was so unbelievably prone to disaster from start to finish that U.S. President Richard Nixon actually had a terrifying alternate speech prepared just in case they didn't make it. The opening line read, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." It's a really chilling reminder of the very real possibility that Armstrong and Aldrin were never coming home.
Now, despite this absolutely miraculous survival, wild conspiracy theories sprouted up almost immediately. Because the whole mission somehow went perfectly at the very end of the 1960s, magically hitting Kennedy's impossible deadline. People started claiming America faked the whole thing in a Hollywood soundstage. They said it was just a giant Cold War backup plan to beat the Soviets.
But let's do a quick reality check here. If this was truly a fake Hollywood production, the Soviet Union would have absolutely loved to expose it and humiliate their rival, right? But instead, the Soviets officially acknowledged the moon landing as a totally factual event. They even put it in their own Great Soviet Encyclopedia, officially listing it as the third historic event of the space age. So the people with the biggest possible motive to prove it was a lie fully accepted it as the truth.
Of course, the conspiracy theorists always point to specific images. Like, here's a big myth. If there's no air on the moon to create wind, why does the video footage clearly show the American flag fluttering and waving around? I mean, surely that means someone left a studio fan turned on, right?
Well, not quite. NASA obviously knew there was no wind up there, so they literally engineered a special flag. It actually had a horizontal rod running across the top just to hold the fabric out so it wouldn't hang totally limp. During the Apollo 11 landing, that top rod actually got jammed and couldn't fully extend, which permanently bunched up the fabric to look like ripples. On top of that, the aluminum poles acted a lot like springs, so the flag only quote-unquote waved when the astronauts physically grabbed it and twisted it into the dirt, making the metal violently vibrate in the vacuum.
Okay, but what about the suspiciously missing stars? In literally all the photos taken by Armstrong and Aldrin on the surface, the sky behind them is completely 100% pitch black. If they're sitting out in the middle of space, shouldn't that sky be filled with millions of brilliant stars?
It's a great question, but the answer is all about camera exposure. They landed during the lunar morning. The insanely bright sunlight bouncing off that gray lunar surface, combined with their highly reflective bright white spacesuits, completely overwhelmed those 1969 camera lenses. Think about it like this. It's exactly like turning on your phone's flash to take a picture of your friend outdoors at night. The foreground is super bright, but all the background stars completely vanish from the shot.
So the real takeaway here is that the mission absolutely wasn't fake, it was just unbelievably, mind-bogglingly expensive. The final price tag came in at roughly $24 billion. Adjusted for today, that's well over $100 billion. And honestly, that is exactly why we stopped going. By 1972, with huge domestic issues and the ongoing Vietnam War, the American public largely viewed the whole Apollo program as a massive waste of taxpayer money, basically forcing politicians to slash the budget.
But wait, there is actually a massive hidden benefit to all that crazy spending. The Apollo program desperately needed lightweight, powerful guidance systems, which created this huge demand for early microchips. Because NASA was buying up so many integrated circuits, production skyrocketed, and computer chip prices absolutely plummeted by 90% in just a few short years. So going to the moon literally kickstarted the entire modern computer era that we all rely on today.
Now, incredibly, more than 50 years after Apollo 17, we are finally heading back. NASA's brand new Artemis program is taking a really deliberate, awe-inspiring approach to return humans to the lunar surface before this decade is out. They've already nailed the unmanned tests, and very soon, they plan to land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. Which leaves us with one final, pretty thrilling thought to consider as we wrap up this explainer. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin miraculously survived an incredibly rushed, highly dangerous analog journey that was entirely driven by a global war and intense political rivalry.
But as we look at these amazing new missions launching today, we really have to ask ourselves, are we truly ready to conquer the moon again? And this time, what will it actually take to make us stay?